Welcome in to the Atlanta Showdown kickoff special, actually. I'm Jeff Cameron of ESPN Radio, joined by Tony Tsoukalas of BamaInsider, Ryan Clark, Warchant.com. What a game to preview, what an opportunity. And this time around, we'll look at Alabama's offensive line versus Florida State's defensive line. And obviously, Florida State is a team that has quite a bit of depth on the defensive line coming back. That's something to look at here with the offensive line at Alabama. 3 returning starters. Obviously, they lose Big Cam Robinson. So, Ryan, I'll start with you. In looking at a critical matchup here, Florida State's defensive line has size, has depth. Talk about this matchup.
Well, I think if you're FSU, you like what you have at defensive line. Yes, you lose DeMarcus Walker, someone who, yes, he's an end, but he had the ability to play inside too. But the thing that you have to like is it's the depth and it's the experience depth. You have Josh Sweat, and you wonder what he's going to be in year 3. And assuming he can be healthy, I think the expectation is imagine what he could put together with that athleticism. You look inside at Derek Nottie and DeMarcus Christmas. Everybody talks about Nottie and the strength. I mean, he's someone who can squat between 600 and 700 pounds, maybe more. They won't let him squat more because they don't want him to risk getting hurt. But with DeMarcus Christmas, the thing you like is he's someone who does the dirty work, and he does it in an effective way. And then when you think about what else they've got, Brian Burns was a freshman last year who led all freshmen in sacks, and he's someone that you figure will go into that Walker spot, or maybe Sweat goes there, but either way you think that's going to be your 4. Then you've got someone like Janarius Robinson, who was hurt last year, but there's a lot of promise, a lot of potential. And then you have Josh Kando, who 5-star defensive end, who really turned some heads in spring ball. And then, of course, there's Marvin Wilson, the number 2 player in the nation, the number 1 defensive tackle. So if you're FSU, that's a pretty good starting point just for depth alone.
Tony, let's look at the offensive line for Alabama, which every year, if you think about it from a national perspective, everybody looks at Alabama and obviously recognizes how well they recruit. Even when they have to replace big-time talent like Robinson, people know Alabama's offensive line is going to come in. They're going to be big. They're going to be strong. They're going to be mobile. They're going to be versatile. Talk about this group.
A tale of 2 different sides for Alabama. The left side seems to be very set, and then the right side kind of has a little bit more question marks. You're going to see Jonah Williams move from right tackle to left tackle, and he seems to have that pretty much anchored down. That move went very smooth during the spring. Left guard should probably be Ross Pierschbacher. He played that all of last season. He's pretty much a lock there, and then center should be Bradley Bozeman. After that, it gets a little bit, there's more question marks. The right guard position's kind of up in the air, and so is the right tackle position. I think you could see Lester Cotton move to that right guard position, or he could play that right tackle position. If he plays guard, you probably see Matt Womack, a guy that was a backup behind Cam Robinson last year, probably take that right tackle position, have Lester Cotton move into that guard position. If you want to put Lester at the right tackle position, you might put a bigger guy like Deontay Brown. They did that during the spring to kind of create more of a push in the run game. So there's options, there's talent. I think Saban said that there was about like 6 offensive linemen that he thought were players you could win with, but it's kind of developing those 6 and making sure you put out the right ones during the fall.
Everybody knows what Jalen Hurts is as a runner and their ability to get out on the outside. You look at Florida State's defensive line last year. Defense as a whole really struggled with teams in the run-pass option, and I would suspect Alabama will employ a lot of that. Talk about what you think their ability maybe to create those holes, for whether it's Scarborough, whether it's Hurts, whoever it is, with this group.
Yeah, that's the exciting thing, and they have the guys to block, they've got the size, and then they've got the talent running behind them. So if Alabama's got 6 running backs, and we'll talk about that later. But they've definitely got some guys that can create some holes. You saw that last year. Like you said, Saban recruits very well. So there's places they got Alex Leatherwood, a 5-star kid coming in. There's some depth on that line that can really create some. It's really just going to be about developing that line as we go forward.
Is there a particular matchup, Ryan, that you look at with this matchup? And you're talking about an offensive line year in and year out that is dominant for Alabama. Is there an area for Florida State that you think Florida State would have the advantage?
I think FSU has the advantage in the interior just because there's so much strength and experience. And you have 2 players in Nottie and Christmas who know their roles. With Nottie, I mean, he's a sort of a do-everything guy in that, yes, I think his strength is the run, but he's someone who can kind of clog lanes in the passing game and help free other guys up. Whereas if with Christmas, he is that player that I think if you take him out of that group, they don't function as well as they do, because he does those things where, I mean, yes, well, Nottie may command attention, Christmas commands attention, and I mean, he's a good guy that, let's say if you're trying to do a stun or anything like that, he's a good person to have in front and kind of help clear the way. So I would think it'd be the interior for certain.
Ultimately, I think everybody wants to know who wins the matchup, but also in the passing game, for example, does Florida State, are they able to generate pressure on Hurts?
You would think so. I mean, this is a group that, was what, second in sacks last year. I mean, I wonder who number one was. But this is a group that, we talk about losing DeMarcus Christmas, and that's going to be a loss. I mean, just like Dalvin Cook leaving is going to be a loss. Anytime you lose someone like that, the impact's going to be felt. But as far as, I guess, how this group goes, I mean, look, you have to like their chances. I mean, this is a group that, yes, you wonder about as it relates to run-pass options because we saw them struggle with that a lot last year. Yeah. I mean, really, you could argue the last 2.5 seasons, going back to Oregon and the Rose Bowl. But you would like to think that there's enough experience in place because I think the last few years you could say, well, yes, they have this star player at this position, but there wasn't enough experience. Whereas if now, I mean, the least experienced of your starting four is going to be Brian Burns, and he had one of the best freshman seasons anyone's had here by a defensive player not named Derwin James in a long time. So you'd have to like their chances to be able to get some pressure and create problems for Alabama. Ultimately,
who wins this matchup, guys? Is this something that's kind of tough to tell this far out, but obviously two very talented groups?
It's really going to come down to how Alabama develops those offensive linemen and how much the middle. That's a great point. With Bradley Bozeman creating some of those holes, that is one of the weaknesses of Alabama. To touch on that, are those two guard positions. If Alabama can strengthen those guard positions, I like what they have in the running game to kind of create those holes and kind of wear them down. I think they'll be a much more balanced offense as well, so that would help kind of alleviate some of that pressure that Hurts might be facing. But like you said, Florida State has a lot of monsters too, so I kind of call it even right now.
I think it's fair to say it's even because, I mean, we can talk about youth and where Alabama needs to develop, but at the end of the day, it's still a Nick Saban team. And how many?
They're still developing 5 stars,
yes,
right?
and I mean, how many times have we looked at Alabama in previous years and gone, hey, this is a potential weakness, and then all of a sudden, it turns into a strength. But I think if you're FSU, you like the building blocks of what you have. It's just more about fine-tuning and developing what you have so that way when you face these RPO teams, whether it's in game 1 of the season or somewhere later down the line, you're not caught in a wilderness like you were against Lamar Jackson. And I mean, I know people have made that argument, well, Louisville had all this time to prepare, but even still, we saw a little bit of it against UNC. We saw some of it when they played Clemson as well. So I think that's just it, is if they can get that handle and then continue to create pressure, you'd have to like their chances.
Almost sounds like we're describing a matchup between two top 3 teams, right? It's going to be pretty even as we do these things because these are 2 elite football teams. On the next preview, we'll take a look at Florida State's passing game and how it looks against Alabama's pass defense.